We are a community
formed by the gospel
and sent on God's mission
to love the Lord and our neighbor,
to live out the scriptures,
and move to engage our culture with the gospel of Jesus.
We gather
and we scatter.
We make,
mature,
and multiply disciples.
We are the Village Church.
Good morning, Village Church. Thanks so much for joining with us this morning. My name is Matt Tucker. I'm one of the pastors here, and I invite you to worship with us through song. Come set your rule and reign in our hearts again. Increase in us, we pray. Unveil why we're made. Come set our hearts ablaze with hope like wildfire in our very souls. Holy Spirit, come invade us now. We are your church. We need your power in us. We seek your kingdom first. We hunger and we thirst. Refuse to waste our lives, for you are joy and prize. To see the captive hearts release, the hurt, the sick, the poor at peace. We lay down our lives for heaven's cause. We are your church. We are revived this earth. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray. Unleash your kingdom's power, reaching the near and far. No force of hell can stop your beauty changing hearts. You made us for much more than this. Awake this kingdom seed in us. Fill us with the strength and love of Christ. We are your church. We are the hope on earth. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here. We pray.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a Sunday morning stream from the Village Church. My name is Scott.
I'm one of the pastors of the Village, and we're super glad you decided to join us for a scattered worship this morning. If you don't know anything about the Village, we just want to take a moment and let you know a little bit about who we are and what we're about here as a local church. The Village is a community that's been formed and is being formed by the gospel and is sent on God's mission. And that mission is to love the Lord and our neighbor, to live out the scriptures, and to move to engage our culture with the gospel of Jesus Christ, to make and mature and multiply disciples. The way that we go about doing that week in and week out here at the Village, we have two rhythms. We gather and we scatter. We gather together usually in the heart of downtown Hamilton, Ohio at the 210. That's 210 South 2nd Street at 10:30 in the morning to build each other up together as disciples. We also gather together throughout the week in groups in people's homes across Butler County for the same reason, to build each other up as disciples. So we can then scatter back out into our neighborhoods, our workplaces, our schools, wherever we happen to find ourselves throughout the week as more faithful and effective servants and missionaries of Jesus. So that's who we are. That's our mission. That's how we go about doing what we do week in and week out here. And so our invitation to you all is to join us in gathering and scattering, to join the family and the mission here of the Village. Even though that looks a little bit different right now, there's still plenty of opportunities for you guys to get connected and plugged into the life of the local church. However, that's not even the most important thing that we would love to talk with you about. If you don't know what it means to be part of God's family, let alone a local church family, we would love to talk with you about Jesus, answer any questions that you might have, tell you about him and what he's done and how that intersects with your life and all those things. We would love to talk with you about that. But if you do want to get connected to this particular local body, there are plenty of ways for you guys to get connected. We still have groups gathering virtually throughout the week, even though it's not in people's homes. Everyone's tuning in from their own home and meeting together throughout the week. We've got a women's Bible study on Friday nights. Every other week we have men's discipleship on Sunday night. There's lots of ways you guys can get connected in community. We also have serve teams who some of them don't have as much to do right now, and yet they're trying to find creative ways to serve. And some of them are doing more or different things than they ever have before. So if you're interested in serving, giving your time and your talent and your resources to the church, there are plenty of ways for you to get connected there as well. You can find out more information about us, about who we are, about what we believe, how you can get connected at myvillagechurch.com. That's our website. So go there and encourage you to check that out. And also for this morning specifically, there is a page devoted for scattered worship for today, May 17th. 2020. You can go there and find the order of gathering for today, sermon outline, discipleship guide, song lyrics, all sorts of things just for this morning's stream. So we encourage you to follow along there. What's going to happen this morning is we are going to pray and sing and just prepare our hearts to hear God's word preached. Pastor Michael is going to continue our sermon series through the book of Exodus, and we'll have an opportunity at the end of all that to reflect and repent and respond to whatever God might be stirring in our hearts today. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to two Johns and a Katie as they continue to lead us in worship this morning through song.
Be my light when the night falls, and be my joy in the morning, be my hope in sorrows, be my side when I'm lonely, be my truth when a lie's gone. Give me faith when I doubt it, when the voices say I'm no good at all. shattered shame I've been bowing into joy so brand new. You calm my weary soul. You're in control. Lord, speak to me and set my feet to run to you. No other love will do. You captivate my heart. Behold, your light comes shining through. Every shadow you consume. You illuminate the dark. And Jesus, oh, Jesus, you illuminate the dark. Jesus, as I rise, strength of God, go before, lift me up. As I wake, eyes of God, look upon, be my side. As I wait, heart of God, satisfied and sustained. As I hear the voice of God, lead me on, be my guide. Be my guide, above and below, before and behind, in every eye that sees me. Christ be all around me, above and below, before and behind, in every eye that sees me. Christ be all around me, yeah. As I go, hand of God, my defense, by my side. As I rest, breath of God, fall upon. Bring me peace, bring me peace, above and below, before and behind, in every eye that sees me. Christ be all around
Good morning, Village Church. Today's focal passage can be found in Exodus chapter 15, verse 22 through 16, verse 36. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore, it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log. And he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, "If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord, your healer." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily." So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we, that you grumble against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him. What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, 'Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp. And in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine, flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it each one of you as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer, according to the number of the persons that each of you has in his tent." And the people of Israel did so. They gathered, some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over till the morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning." So they laid it aside till the morning as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day." So the people rested on the 7th day. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I feed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The people of Israel ate the manna 40 years, so they came to a habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. An omer is the 10th of an ephah." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks for that reading, Michael Pate. My name is Michael Graham. I am one of the pastors of the Village Church. Thanks so much for hanging out with me in my attic and with all of us gathered, even though we are scattered today. We are jumping into Exodus, the 20th sermon in this series, so there's a ton to get to. Let's get rolling. Road trips are the best. I love road trips. In fact, one of the things that I'm missing as we're all under stay-at-home orders and things are closed down is being able to get up and go. And I love road trips, whether it's a week-long destination, family vacation, or whatever, or if it's just a weekend getaway to the Red River Gorge or whatever. I just love picking up, packing up, and heading out. But you and I know that road trips are not always smooth sailing. Think about the classic, kind of iconic movie road trip. There's lots of work to get there. There's saving and prepping and packing and an early morning departure. Everything's in order. You leave the house. You take a big sigh as you just think about all the things. We made it. We're on the road. Did we close the garage door? Did we forget Kevin? All the things. And before you even get to the interstate, you know it's going to happen. I'm hungry. I have to use the restroom. I forgot are we there yet? All the things. Imagine taking a 40-year road trip with 1 or 2 million of your closest friends and family and neighbors and kids and all of that. This is the scene we have here in this section of Exodus in chapter 16 and a little of 15. That's the scene that we have. Who's leading? Who's responsible for food? Where are we going? I'm thirsty. You're following too close. You're going too fast. You didn't use your blinker when you switched lanes. And there's just loads of assumption and lots of things that are unsure. But one thing we can be sure of, and that is complaining is a national pastime. We are so good at complaining. And I'm not just talking about kids. That's not the case, but all of us complain. Students complain about the teacher and the teacher complains about the students and coworkers complain about the boss and the boss complains about the coworkers and citizens complain about the streets in their neighborhood and customers complain about the service. But here's the thing, before you apply your judgment to Israel and their complaints, and hear me, they are a bunch of whiners. We're going to look at that today. We're going to look at that next week. And this continues on. This is the story of Israel, right? They're a bunch of whiners despite what God has done for them. But before we cast judgment, I just want to encourage us to take a look around outside of us and inside of us. Read the culture around you. Everyone is an expert and very few of those experts bear any real responsibility to lead anything, let alone the masses, and even at that, the diversity of which the masses bring. So leadership is lose-lose, okay? Parenting leadership, lose-lose. You do what's right, you get criticized for it. Presidential leadership, leading a nation, right? This isn't a political statement, but can you imagine leading a divided nation, how difficult that would be? You lose no matter what you say, no matter what you don't say. Pastoral leadership, man, you guys are kind and gracious, and I love that. But as we as elders consider what it looks like transitioning out of a pandemic, and we begin to gather again as the church, understanding that there is a polarized culture outside of us, that everyone is an expert, and that in much of that on the polar sides of things, that there's lose. In fact, I chatted with a pastor friend of mine this week, and they shot some stuff out about kind of reopening and what the gatherings would look like, and he shoots me a couple screenshots, and basically it says, one person says, well, you're not doing enough, so my family will not be attending. And literally the same day, another family sends something out, you're doing too much, and my family will not be attending. Now I say that just to demonstrate how difficult leading is, and I want you to know that this is a non-responsive word of encouragement here. The expectation that we have for us who are the Village Church, and if you're listening to this and you're outside of the Village Church, man, I'm super glad that you're hanging out with us. But just for a moment, those who are part of the Village, here's what we won't do. Now, as you scroll your social media feed, and when we come back together as the church, whenever that may be, we won't villainize, and we won't patronize, we won't dismiss, we won't belittle, we won't assign value based on political preference or whether or not you wear a mask or any of those things. But what we will do, we will seek unity even amidst the diversity within us and around us. And so I don't care what you think of the President of the United States or the governor or your local mayor, but I do care whether or not we as the Village Church put love on display no matter what. And I do care if you aim to fracture unity. So, with all that in mind, and considering the complaints that stir within us and that stir around us, why do we complain? Well, I think we complain because we don't trust. Because if we trusted, we would let it go. So we complain because we don't trust. And the difference here in this text compared to, your worst nightmare road trip is that your Uncle Steve isn't leading the caravan, but God himself is. And sure, he's using his servant Moses, and he's using Aaron and others, but God himself is leading the caravan, the exodus out of Egypt to the land he has promised. He has promised to take ownership and leadership and care and lead in care and lead in provision. So God is leading his people from terrible generational slavery and captivity to a land that is flowing with life so much as it is dependent upon him who is the giver and the author of life. And God's demand is this: trust me. That's God's demand over and over again throughout all of the scriptures for all time. It's trust me. And if you trust me, follow me. And if you do, I will lead you in safety, and I will provide for you wherever I lead you. God is a generous provider, even in the face of complaint and demand. Or maybe another way of saying this would be, no matter how much God gives, we want more. And no matter how much we complain, what we see here is that God gives more. So this is a huge focal passage. Do your homework, read this stuff. But this is kind of what's going on. So we're going to spend a little time looking at the text itself, and then we'll tease out with kind of 3 points of application towards the back end. So this is Exodus the 15:22 through all of 16. And we find kind of in this chunk 2 of 3 in a series of trials and tests for the people of God to demonstrate their faithfulness and for God to demonstrate his faithfulness. At the end of 15, we see this thing as they're journeying along. They come to a place, they're thirsty, they find a watering hole, and it has bitter water in it. And so they name this place the place of bitterness. The people grumble against Moses, and what they say is what are we going to drink, right? And so there's this contentious dependence upon Moses, and what now, wise guy? Now that you have us here, what are you going to do with this, right? What shall we drink? And so Moses, he turns and he cries to God, and God tells him is just this a little demonstration of the unlikely ways in which God presents His provision. He says, throw a log into this salty water, and throw a log into this bitter water, and when you do that, the water will become sweet. And that's exactly what He does, because God's people needed something else to know that God was for them, right? So that's what happens. And so God gives this kind of conditional response. He says, if you seek and follow, if you listen and obey, I'll protect you. And in this relationship that we have will be nothing like what you saw in Egypt, all right? So they move on. And now we're in chapter 16, verse 1. And let me read this. I'm just going to read the first couple verses. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. And on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land, so they're out about 45 days out of Egypt, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. See, I read this and I think, man, just in the last chapter, the whole congregation was singing this song of praise and thanks be to God who rescues them. And so I think, well, maybe there were just a few, but as Moses tells us, he says, everyone is complaining. And so they're complaining, and this is what they say: the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So it's a common thing. They're on a road trip and they're saying, we're hungry. But things seem a little more contentious than that. And so there's just a few things we can pull out of this. The first thing, and these aren't big points, the first thing is they're literally going to kill Moses. There's a million plus hangry people. And Moses has been the one that has been the conduit at which God has brought His blessing all the way up to this point. And so these people, sinful as they are, they begin to make a terrible decision. They are literally threatening to kill Moses. And if you've been following, that seems like a terrible idea. The second thing is that we see is they remember Egypt with a particular fondness that didn't seem to be there when they were brick bakers in the land of Egypt. When they were under the tyrant Pharaoh's thumb, more bricks, more production, more productivity. Oh yeah, you want to go worship your God? How about you continue to make those bricks without straw now, right? Figure it out. But isn't that what we do? We complain about yesterday, we complain about today, and today we complain about yesterday, and today we complain about tomorrow, and tomorrow we complain about today. They look back into the time of their slavery in Egypt under Pharaoh, and it's as if they remember themselves kicked back, surrounded by the meat pots. I mean, what an embellishment that must have been. Surrounded by the meat pots, and they say we had bread to the full, as if it were the good old days. And so they say, Moses, what have you brought us out here to kill us with starvation? And if we might, man, to just take a moment for Moses. I feel for this guy. He leads humbly and insecurely. He stumbles in faithfulness, and he's a middleman between what God, this crazy, insane idea that God is rescuing them from, and he can't win. with the masses. And then we read on, picking up in verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread. Right? So there's no prayer. It's just God hearing them. And he tells Moses, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and they'll gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, at evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us? And then Moses says, when the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that your grumble is against him. What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. God hears and God responds. He is a good dad. He has demonstrated that. He isn't promising to be the wind in every sail wherever you decide to sail, but he will blow wind where he calls his people. Remember, he isn't just bringing them from someplace, but he's bringing them to a better place, the land of which he has promised. He isn't blind to the fact that his people who he rescued are being delivered according to his promise and according to his plan. And he isn't blind to the fact that they're hungry. So he says, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. And what we see here is what we see from cover to cover. It is that our relationship with God is always about trust. It is always a matter of faith alone. That is the foundation of our relationship with God. And then we see here this truth bomb from Moses right in the middle, and it should just cut us. He speaks to his countrymen, and he speaks to his brothers and sisters in Christ by faith alone today, when he speaks to the nature of complaining hearts. This is what he says. He says, God provides in the evening, in the morning. And when you grumble, it isn't against us. Who am I that you would grumble against me? He's basically saying, I can't produce food. Who am I? Your complaints are against the Lord. Who is it who holds the world in his hands? Who is it who possesses all that is? Who is it who gives and takes away? It is the Lord. And so Moses calls it like it is. When you complain about your lot, it isn't against your parents. It isn't against the government. It isn't against your neighbor. It isn't helpful. But even more, it is against the Lord. Your complaints are against the Lord, our provider. And so that doesn't dismiss basic realities. You may have a terrible boss, right? And you may make terrible decisions that get you into terrible places, but when you are in a situation because of the Lord who has brought you there for his purpose, and you complain about it, it isn't against humans, but the one who holds all things, including the details of your life, in his hands. So then as this chapter unfolds a little further, and in verse 9, kind of through 15, there's this other chunk, and we see, come near before me, for the Lord has heard your grumbling. And he says, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud to assure them that God was with them. And he says, the Lord says, I have heard, and by twilight you will have meat, and in the morning you'll be filled with with bread you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So he says you're going to have quail in the evening, and as far as I can tell, he says you're going to have frosted flakes in the morning. And so they say, what is it? What is this stuff that we see here? And Moses says, it is the bread the Lord gave you from heaven. There are tons of connections to complaint and the New Testament. There are tons of connections to bread and the New Testament, and none more tightly connected than Jesus as the provision for our fullness and life. In John 6, towards the end, in verse 44 and following, he says, so the Jews grumbled at him because he said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. This is Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. And even in that, we see God's people, the Jews, grumble against Jesus. And they said, is not Jesus the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down from heaven? They're saying, is he not just a mere man? How is it that he can make this outrageous claim? And Jesus answered them, do not grumble among yourselves. Jesus lays for us breadcrumbs pointing back to him as revealed in the mighty works of Old Testament provision. He is pointing us back to this chapter and this concept, just as God provided in the desert to provide bread from heaven to give life, so am I. I am the bread of life. So we must get the connections that God reveals, and we must understand that all of the promises of God find their yes in him. So with all of this in mind as a setup, and as the chapter continues to unfold, we are brought in to grow along with Israel. And so kind of 3 observations that we can make, that we get to, 1, work hard to gather enough. So we pick up in verse 16. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each of you, as much as he can. You shall each take an omer according to the number of the persons. So he's like a measuring cup. According to the number of persons that each of you has in his tent. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered, some more, some less. But when they measured it, whoever gathered much had nothing left over. And whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. Now look, there's a ton of stuff about work, even in that God makes space for those that desire more and that want to work more, to have more. And so he says, gather as much as you want. And that who wants a ton, have your full. And that who want a little, have your full. There's this connection that we see in Acts chapter 2 in the New Testament. And this is after Jesus died and ascended into heaven. We see the early church gathering together, and we see this picture of beauty in the end of Acts chapter 2. The church gathers its resources together, and it puts generosity on display by contributing as each had need. And it says that none lacked, and everyone gave, and everyone had their full. And so it wasn't communism that's fueled by demand. It was Spirit-fueled communalism. There was a common unity among them where each was esteeming the other more than himself. That notion, the call for generosity, is a reflection of God's history and a reflection of God's provision and generosity for his people. God is a generous provider, even in the face of complaint and demand. But that didn't come without human effort. There's so much confusion, and rightly so. Like, how do we apply or interpret this? There's a ton of difficulty when we consider kind of the idea of handout, provision, and we see entitlement, and where's mine? From the beginning, God empowers His people, and He provides all that we need to thrive. But Israel had to leave the tent. As far as I can tell when I read this, in the evening, the quail, they didn't just run in the tent and pluck out their own feathers and jump into the air fryer. Right? That's not what we see here. The early church, they gathered their resources. They distributed as others had need, but those resources came from where? From a hard day's work. So now's when the preacher says, look, money won't just show up in your bank account. And most of the time, that would be true, right? Times are a little different in this exact moment. But even that money that might just miraculously or through the provision of a government agency, that's not going to sustain us. That's not how God has built community. That's not how God has built you or wired you, that we might sit back and receive. But He calls us to work. So we get to connect the world we live in to these principles. God gives good gifts. He gives wisdom. And we too get to work hard to gather enough. And we see this from the foundation of human existence, that God put Adam in the garden to do what? To sit back? No. He put him in the garden to work it and to keep it. And He did that in chapter 2, not in chapter 3 where sin comes in and wrecks everything. Certainly work changes with the curse that man will sweat by the brow and he will fight against the dust and all those things. But God was put into the garden to work it and to keep it. He had responsibility to govern creation, to organize, to use the gifts that God had given him, to oversee it, to farm it and to till it in the joy of God's presence and God's provision, so that creation might flourish and fruitfully multiply the glory of God. We still get to work hard to gather enough, each according to his own, for the glory of God. The second thing here is we get to work hard to trust God. Let's pick up in 19. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over till the morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms, and it stank. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, and each had as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. There is this iconic scene, this iconic line in the movie Aladdin, and I think it's in both of them, the 92 version and the newer one. But it's the princess is imposturing as a peasant because of the pressure and the demand of life in the palace. And then you have Aladdin, who is, as they call him in the song, a street rat. He is a peasant. He's a scrapper. He steals to get by, but he knows how to navigate the streets. He knows how things work. And then in this moment, they're in like a second story loft, and some of the villain Jafar's henchmen, they come and they capture Aladdin, or they try to capture Aladdin, and he says this line to Jasmine, and it comes up again later on. He says, "Do you trust me?" And she looks up and she says, "What?" And he says, "Do you trust me?" And she says, "Yeah." And he says, then jump. And they just jump kind of into this big hole of darkness, and they bounce around and you know, they go on. The beautiful undercurrent to the relationship is that she doesn't really trust anyone. Jasmine doesn't trust anyone. That's why she's playing dress up in the market. And yet, after meeting Aladdin, 10 seconds ago, she's willing to jump with him. Trust is a funny thing. And the older I get, and perhaps the older we get, the more calloused we can become, the less trusting we can become, the more difficult trust becomes, because all of creation, that's expectations and relationships and people, all of it is a fractured version of God's design. There is deceit, and there is letdown, and there is disillusionment, and all sorts of opportunity to wince and to run rather than to trust and to jump. But even so, to proceed with caution, that's not a bad thing. Part of the maturing that age brings is a cautious wisdom. And knowing about life and ourselves, it enables us to put our trust in safe places and in safe people. What I want us to know is what screams from the pages of this text. God is a worthy provider. He is trustworthy and He is good. He is faithful and true for us. He is for us and He is for His glory. And we get to work hard to trust Him. And from my vantage point, what we get to do to position ourselves for that work is we get to know Him. Not just knowing about Him, not just hearing what others say about Him, but we get to know Him. We get to, as Moses says, diligently listen to His voice. We get to do that which is right in His eyes, to give ear to and to keep His commandments. Just like Israel wasn't merely hearing God, but they were to follow where He led. And just like God provided sweet water and bread in the desert, He provides Himself as the bread of life that we might eat and that we might be full, satisfied in the deserts of this life and also in the fertile valleys. Or as Paul says, essentially Christ is the essence. He's the key to unlocking contentment in both plenty and in want. Or we see in Matthew, man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that flows from the mouth of God. God is showing us that is the point, that this is about trust and listening to God more than it is about having a full belly. Or we see in John 6:35, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall never hunger. Whoever believes in me shall never thirst. And here we have hoarders of generosity, tucking a little more in their pockets to trust the work of their hands rather than the work of the Lord to provide. Security in our own hands rather than the provision from God's hands. So I'd ask this, do you trust God to provide where He leads us? Because if you do, then you will seek, you will search Him, and you will follow Him where He leads. The last thing is this: work hard to rest well. This is verse 22. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So they laid it aside. And remember what happened before when they did that is worms grew in it and it stank. So they laid it aside till the morning as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. Right? This is just a picture of God's miraculous provision. And what we see is that any provision is a miracle of God. He holds all provision in his hand. So Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find in it the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is Sabbath, there will be none." There is a ton here. We see Moses unpack this in Exodus 20 and beyond when he lays out this command. He's laying out for the first time the Sabbath, and up to this point we had God resting on the seventh day. And now we see him infusing these principles that God desires for his people, that we might rest in him one day a week, that we might set aside and just trust his provision and his productivity and not only our own. This section is a contrast of kings. It's contrasting Egypt versus the God who listens and cares and leads and disciplines and provides. We see the foundation for Sabbath rest that will be part of the rule of faith in the law and the covenant and the 10 Commandments. And it's more than a foundation for rest. We see the purpose of Sabbath. Sabbath rest is an opportunity to cultivate dependence and to demonstrate dependence. Sabbath rest is an opportunity for God's people to both cultivate dependence within our heart, to remind ourselves what it is that we're trusting in, whose provision that we're trusting in, and it's also an opportunity to demonstrate, to put it on display that our dependence is not on the work of our hands. So we get to cut across the grain of the culture that says more work, more productivity, or as Egypt said, more bricks, more production. And we get to find space to cultivate in our own hearts rest and to demonstrate to the world around us rest that only comes from the Lord. Jesus tells us that the Sabbath was made for us, not otherwise. He says he is the Lord of the Sabbath. And don't get me wrong, it seems like they have to work doubly hard on the sixth day, right? So that they might make sure that they prepare a space, a rhythm to rest. And time forbids me from going on about this, but if God models and he demonstrates provision with rest, and he sets up worms as our teacher to challenge our untrusting, self-dependent heart and lives, then perhaps we could turn to him to find our rest, and a rest that never flees or never fails. We get to, right? We get to, because the Sabbath is for us, implement rhythms into our lives that reflect who it is that actually spins the earth, and who it is that actually allows the seed to bring forth life, and who it is that allows our gifts to gather enough in whatever context, whatever time we live on the face of this earth. He is the one who allows our hearts to trust and our mind to rest. Look, it's easy to read all of this and to make merely logistical or practical or temporal connections, provision of food and all these things. But we must remember that this is not just about a road trip. This is not just about the way that you handle your personal finance or the way that you hoard or live generously. It's not just about what the directions are or when we need refills of gas or when we use the restroom or where we get our food, but this is a picture and a story of salvation. So when we read that Christ is the bread of life, it means that he satisfies us in a way that none of those things ever could or ever will. It means that he is enough to get us where we need to go. So we need to listen, to trust, to follow. And when we do, then we get to put that truth on display in the way that we deal with our stuff and our work and our money and all the minutes that you think are ours. And in the laying down of productivity with regularity, long enough to remember, to remind our own hearts that there is one God and He's not us, and to declare to those around us, to the busy culture around us, that there is one God and He's not us. When we do that, then our complaints and our demands, they melt like the morning manna and turn to remembering the delight our God has for us in saving us, and that we too can have in Him alone. God is a generous provider, even in the face of complaint and demand. Would you continue to reflect, repent, and respond with all of us today? See you next week.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, He is my song. You are good, good.
Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. In the month of May, we want to highlight and emphasize the importance of the family and the community aspect of the local church. And so today, we wanted to ask one of our group members who's connected to a community group here at the Village to just talk about how important, how beneficial it's been to be connected in community, especially right now at this time.
Hey, Village Church, this is Zach Shire. I was asked to discuss how being connected in the community group could be beneficial, and I think one, having a community group is extremely important because for me it keeps me accountable and with what I'm doing with my life and what I'm trying to achieve within my life, and those in my community group can keep me encouraged and show a source of love when it feels like things are getting hard throughout school or work. And secondly, being connected to community group has been just immensely encouraging even during these times, because I think isolation can really set in, and sometimes it feels as if you don't have anyone to talk to. But when that day when you have a community group, you are able to connect with those who do really care about you and do love you. And it's a great feeling when you can just be able to talk to them about how your week is going, and you're able to also listen to how the others are doing. And I think in a way helps mold and help you grow, help shape you and helps you grow. And I think that's really important because I think community groups, even though we're not able to gather as a church, we are scattered, but we are able to still gather as one in the community.
Thanks so much for those words. If you are interested in getting connected to community here at the Village, we would encourage you to go to our website at myvillagechurch.com. There's a page devoted entirely to our community groups. You can actually just go to myvillagechurch.com/groups. It'll take you right there. You can see where our groups would usually be gathering together in person in homes across Butler County. You can see the day and the time that those groups meet, and you can actually reach out to the leaders of those groups via a form right there on the page. So if you have questions, want a little bit more information about what to expect, all those things, you can reach out to them right there, and they will get back to you as soon as they can. So we would love to help you get connected. Go to the page and let us know how we can help. Thinking about the future, the next several weeks here as a church, we hope in the next 2 to 3 weeks to maybe give you guys some idea, some plan as to what it looks like for us to reopen the doors of the 210 on Sunday mornings as the state of Ohio slowly starts to reopen as well. So we'll be talking to folks within the Village, leaders and people who just come from different perspectives and things about that. We'll be talking to folks outside the Village and just putting together what we hope is a wise, careful plan to move forward. We are eager to meet with you all and to see you all face to face again, but we want to be smart in the way that we go about doing that. So we know that there is not one plan that is going to fit everyone, one plan of action that's going to fit everyone. And so we just want to know that that while the plan is important, the posture of our hearts is even more important. We've tried to cultivate that as leaders as we've been going through this thing, and we just encourage you all to be cultivating a posture of heart that is loving towards others, respectful of others. We certainly don't want to make space as folks make different decisions about what it looks like for them to re-enter or not back into normal rhythms. We don't want to make space for guilt or shame or any of those things within our Village family. Jesus has taken those things away. Instead, we get to allow people to make choices based on what they believe is best for them from a health perspective or a conviction perspective, to do that and lead themselves or their families or to love their neighbors as they see fit. And so we want the reunion of the saints together, the reunion of the Village Church in person to be a glorious, fun, celebratory occasion. We don't want it to be something that's done under coercion or guilt or shame. And so just know that that whatever plan we put in place, that the posture of our hearts is to allow you guys to do what you feel is best for you or your family or your neighbors. So we'll talk more about that down the road, but I just want to let you know to look for that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We are thinking about that. We ask for your prayers as we consider those things as well. And lastly, man, if you find yourselves in a place of need, or if you know neighbors that are in need at this time, then please let us know. We know things have changed, and some folks have kind of weathered some storms through the midst of all this, and some of us are just sort of entering some difficult places in the midst of this. And so please let us know. We are here to help you, to come alongside of you as a church. And again, there is no guilt or shame here for being in need. The heart of the gospel is the fact that we are needy, and Christ is sufficient to meet our needs. And so it would be our joy to come alongside of you and to help you wherever you may find yourself. So please let us know if we can help in any way. I want to send you all out with a benediction. It's a good word. As you go, feel free to raise your hand in affirmation of it. May we go into our week trusting that even in the face of our complaints and our demands, God is a generous provider who calls us to rest in Him. Grace and peace with you all. Love you and miss you.